Hi and welcome to another edition of Tech Interviews. So on this week's show I wanted to take a look at part of the IT industry that is a constant. You know, it's something that's always a challenge, it's always a question, and it's always an issue that is constantly growing, and that's the world of data protection. You know, as our data estates become ever more complex, ever more disparate, ever more geographically spread, the challenges around data protection continually increase. So what is the state of the data protection market? You know, what is the future of data protection and data backup? So one of the joys of doing this show is every now and again I get to see somebody present something that I find really interesting and get to invite them to come on the show to talk about kind of the topic that they covered and dig into a little bit more detail about kind of the areas that they covered so that we can share them here on Tech Interviews. So this week is exactly one of those things. So I'm very fortunate to be joined by, well, somebody who's become a very good friend over the last few years. Dave Russell. Hi, Dave.
Hey, Paul, how are you?
Yeah, real good. Nice to have you on Tech Interviews. Hey, look, before we jump into the topic, why don't you take a moment, introduce yourself, tell people who you are and what it is you do.
Sure. So I'm Dave Russell. Been in backup now for a bit of time, about 31 years. And I'm currently at Veeam as of the last 2.5 years. And I look after enterprise strategy, but don't let the enterprise scare you. And that I really look after how Veeam can better address all segments of the market. But if I had to say I have one remit, it's how we can even further penetrate the success that Veeam's already had into enterprise organizations.
So yeah, so to that kind of thing about enterprise strategy, and I think you make a good point actually right at the start there about don't be confused by the word enterprise, because obviously data protection is something that affects organizations of all sorts, and I think from the smallest to the very largest, that kind of change in the way that we are, the way that our data platforms now and our entire data estates has grown and changed with public cloud, with on-prem, with multiple sites, with endless amounts of devices, and obviously over the last 7 months of 2020, the vast change in the way that our entire infrastructure looks. You know, no more do we have or necessarily have 1,000 people in our big head office. We've just got 1,000 offices with individuals in, and we're looking at how we protect data and deal with all of that kind of challenge. And a few months back at Veeam's VeeamON event, I saw you kind of present this this session on the current data backup market and the future of data backup. So maybe let's start there. So, you know, what's your view of kind of the current status of kind of data protection, of backup? You know, what are we seeing in terms of the way organizations are handling problems? And maybe that's changed actually since you did VeeamON. Maybe you've seen some changes just because of the current situation. And what are some of the challenges that organizations are seeing?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. You know, I would say even pre-pandemic, the market has really been in transition. It's been in transition for some period of time. You know, it's perhaps a little easy to say, oh, well, backup, everyone's purchased backup software. Maybe you even have multiple different backup products deployed in your organization. Haven't we checked that box? And sadly, the answer is yes, that's true. People have deployed solutions, but if you unearth, you know, are they really getting the value out of those solutions? Are they getting what they want, what they expect? And more often than not, the answer is no. And that's not just me saying that. Veeam did a global blind, meaning it was done by a third party. We didn't promote the fact it was Veeam asking the questions. So we did 1,550, so a little more than 1,500 global, mostly enterprise survey respondents from a variety of different countries, and we asked them a number of specific questions about their availability practice. But to put a fine point on it, to help answer one of the questions you posed, the expectation was that they would be getting more from their backup and recovery systems. And then if I had to use one word to kind of characterize the state of the market, it would probably be frustration. And that frustration manifests itself from a variety of different reasons. This survey, I should point out, concluded just as COVID was beginning to embrace or take hold in various parts of the world. It concluded at the end of January. And I'll give you a little bit of color about what I think might have changed or what we've seen since that period of time. But the frustration that we saw really manifests itself around issues on capability, particularly backup success rates. And just if I pause on that, Paul, it's a bit like saying the very thing that you deployed, a service or a product for, your frustration level is that you're not getting what you wanted for that exact same purpose. It's a bit like saying I bought an automobile, and what would drive you to change automobiles? Well, you would like it to reliably start. It's a bit of a incriminating statement, if you will, on the current state of affairs. Beyond that, though, there's definitely concerns around costs, whether that's license or maintenance or infrastructure costs associated with this, and then complexity with trying to manage the systems. It's the people have already been tasked, the administrative team, with protecting a wide variety of workloads. And I always like to say, service level agreements may be certain level or certain availability expectation, but the business really believes that you're never going to go down, that you're never going to lose any data. So that service level expectation far surpasses service level agreements. If I said one more thing, just what's changed maybe in the two handfuls of months roughly, since then, in about 9 months or so, I would say, unfortunately, as you point out, we're a bit geographically dispersed. A lot of us still working remotely, working from home. Some of us now can go back into the data center, but it's almost a tale of have and have nots. And I've heard this expressed as a K-shaped curve. If you think of a capital letter K, and you've got part of that K going up and part going down. And what we've seen is that those organizations that embraced cloud capabilities, software as a service, maybe they were already had a little bit higher percentage of remote workforce. They're kind of riding that upward direction K or curve, meaning they've weathered this transition better than some of the organizations that might be kind of sloping downwards, that got a little more fearful. They paused on some of their initiatives. They weren't as well prepared to make the shift from work from home. They didn't have, maybe the equipment. They didn't have the networking infrastructure. They didn't have the support capabilities. So, really, unfortunately, those better prepared have gone further faster, in some cases even doubling down on their digital transformation initiatives, rolling out new capabilities sooner rather than pushing them out for next year.
So I mean, there you go. That was your revenge for my really long question, wasn't it? So I got a really long answer, and but that's fine, because I think there's lots of really interesting stuff in there. And actually, two of those frustrations that you talk about, I think, have been issues with the data protection industry all of the time that I've been working. And I've worked with data protection solutions, backups for probably 25 years. And there's always been two things that really strike me about them. One is how complicated they can be. We started off this conversation, didn't we, talking about your job title around enterprise, and not to be confused about enterprise, because actually lots of the things that we talk about affect the smallest companies to the very largest. And I think one of the things that's always struck me is the solutions that are aimed at that kind of small and mid-market end, how complicated they can be. Ultimately, these are not people with massive teams of IT folk. They're not necessarily, and even where they have an IT team, the IT team, there's never anybody whose job is data protection. They've got 10 other jobs that they're trying to do. So this
Right.
stuff's got to be simple. And you talked before about, that the one of the other frustrations being success rates. It's got to be simple, and this stuff's got to work. So they are absolutely things that kind of stand out to me. And without preening Veeam's feathers too much on the show, I think one of the things that Veeam talk about a lot, and certainly when I work with Veeam customers, one of the things they will always say is, I just put Veeam in and it just works. And I'll often say, whether I'm talking to Veeam or whether I'm talking to a customer who uses Veeam, that you can't underplay the importance of that simplicity and working, because data protection, you don't want to find out that data protection is difficult or doesn't work the day when you've lost all of your data. And I'm sure we've all seen people in that. And I mean, is that the kind of feedback that you get in that that people just want the simple life? Particularly because our data is so complex. Give me the simple life. I can just put it in and it just works. And when I need it, I know it's works. Is that kind of what people are desperate for?
Yeah, I think it's really about an outcome. I mean, there are people that like technologies for technology's sake. I'll use that car analogy. There are some people that really enjoy working on automobiles. The phrase they like to get their hands dirty, like to go change their own oil, make some updates or modifications. But the fact is, the vast majority of people, they just want to, press the button or turn the key and get the automobile started, and they can get on with what they really want to do, which is go to the park, go to the grocery store, what have you. They want an outcome. They don't want to be sort of mired in the experience. And, there's an old kind of crass saying, but in backup, it's very hard to restore what you haven't backed up or backed up properly. And so to your point about, you don't want to find out, at day 100 that the last 99 days you have not been properly protecting either all of your systems or all of your applications. So the phraseology, it just works, becomes critically important. And, unfortunately, in disasters, or now increasingly with cyber events, those are kind of worst case scenarios on multiple levels. But here's the part that oftentimes people don't always consider. Heightened state of awareness. The business may know that you're down. Maybe it's a disaster, or some weather event, or maybe it's a cyber attack, and everybody knows that this has transpired. So it's a very emotional state. Production is probably compromised. You're expected as the practitioner to get data back rapidly, not to lose any data. And there's a lot going on very, very rapidly, particularly in cyber, because these attacks have gotten so sophisticated and they're so nefarious that they go after backup systems as well. They go after infrastructure, maybe overwriting microcode. So you're now scrambling not just for data, you're looking for maybe installation media for applications or operating systems. You're looking for new gear to deploy. Boy, anything that can be done to make that process simpler is going to be very beneficial and get you to that better outcome faster. That's what it's really about. Get to what your desired state is faster.
And I think that phrase outcomes actually is a really interesting one. And I was kind of going back through the notes of some of the things that you covered at VeeamON that encouraged me to want to kind of do this show, because I think it's such an interesting topic, and it's a topic that is absolutely part of every IT decision makers, key thinking, and for their business. You talked there about kind of business continuity and disaster recovery. They're right up on the list of things that businesses want from their technology stack, from their IT teams. And one of the things that you talked about, so because that phrase outcomes does interest me, one of the things you talked about in that session that you gave was kind of how global backup and recovery priorities are shifting. And is that kind of part of what you're seeing? It's no longer good enough for a business to think, oh, I've got a backup and it sits on a tape somewhere. People are looking to do more with that data and potentially use that kind of data protection capability they've got to maybe enable them to do something innovative inside of their business, maybe using it as a way of integrating cloud, or as you were talking about there, finding new and better ways to build business continuity plans. Are they the kind of things that you meant when you talked about the way that the priorities were shifting?
Yeah, absolutely. And I always point to, if you're doing availability correctly, you're protecting 100% of your vital systems with great regularity. And historically, the reason you've done that is historical averages globally where you only recovered 3 to 5% of that data on any annualized basis. And the catch was you didn't know which 3 or 5%, and you didn't know which day or hour that might be needed. Now you fast forward, I'll use kind of the carrot and the stick. The stick part is cyber and malware. That literally could affect 100% of your data. The attack surface isn't no longer just a few systems. It could be the entire corporate landscape, the IT systems that you depend on. So now you're faced with the reality of bringing back full data center, not just a few systems. Now, to your point, though, more aspirationally, I always say if you're going to go through all of the trouble, whether that's investment, the human engineering associated with it, the gear that you deploy, the networking that you put in place, you're capturing that data, pulling it across the wire, putting it someplace, hopefully putting it in multiple locations, following what we like to call the 3-2-1 rule. But if you're going to go do that effort, then how else can you leverage that asset? Going back to the notion of better business outcomes, now you've got fresh copies of production data. What could you do from an app dev perspective, a DevOps perspective, or if you find yourself in a bad situation from a forensic analysis perspective, how could you leverage that data to do more intelligent things? Availability, first and foremost, we have to make a copy just in case. And that just in case might now be not just natural disasters, but it could be man-made disasters like cyber, something that's much more malicious. But after that, what can we do to actually help the business, propel the business forward? The first side sounds a bit like an insurance policy, which is beneficial for sure. But how else can you go and take that and push the business, especially in 2020, when a lot of many organizations, they find themselves compromised. They're looking for new revenue streams, new ways to satisfy customer demands, better customer experience. Our belief is that the answer's in the data. Obviously, it takes human relationships to make that work as well, but we are largely a data-driven society, and however we could best make that first available, but secondarily leverage that. That's the shifting landscape that we see.
Yeah, and I think I think being able to use that data is, is hugely important. And there's a couple of things that you said there that kind of got me thinking. That idea that that change in expectation. Because traditionally, I suppose if we wound back, let's say we wind back 15 years, we would look at a data backup as being just that. That almost the view was, has the backup worked? I remember when I first started kind of working with people around backups, and people would have a tape in their server, and they'd have their bit of backup software. And the way that they knew whether the backup had worked was at the end of the backup job, you would set something that said eject the tape when you finished. So you would walk in, you'd open you'd walk into the data center, or more likely the cupboard where the server sat. You'd walk in and there's a tape hanging out of that, and you think, great, the backups have worked. I always remember one story that we had where I know somebody that they would put a cleaning tape in every day because they didn't know the difference between their data cartridge and their cleaning cartridge. Every morning
Ooh.
they'd come home, the cleaning tape was out, they assumed they had a backup because that's all they were looking at. Had the backup job run? And you used a phrase before about availability, and I think it sounds like a subtle difference, but I think kind of looking at some of those other things that you were talking about, I think the idea of availability is very different from the idea of backup, because it's not just so much I've got a copy of the data somewhere. It's those kind of things that you talked about around its speed of recovery, it's potentially the locations that I recover to, or maybe it's the idea make that data available so I can do other high value things with them. Is it? I mean, is that along the right kind of lines? Availability, that subtle difference, but maybe such a powerful difference.
Yeah, I think absolutely. If I were to make an analogy of that, what you really want to do is resume, not restore. And maybe the analogy might be a bit of, if the power goes out, you don't want the power to go down. Someone goes, looks for the generator, maybe futzes around, understands what levers they need to push, buttons, etc. And then some period of time later, power comes up. What you really want to have happen is perhaps the lights flicker, but quickly the emergency lights are back on, or the generator fails over rapidly. You experienced a mild bit of discontinuity, but really at a blink of an eye, you were back and going. That's really what we'd like to aspire to, that any kind of service discontinuity is so minimal that it's not business impactful. It's certainly not revenue impactful. It's not damaging customer brand or loyalty or any kind of revenue transaction. And then from that perspective onward, we want to reduce the friction of being able to get data to the right place at the right time. That's where data portability and cloud mobility become very key, especially as more and more of us are increasingly embracing cloud-based services.
That piece about cloud, and I kind of want to dig into that a little bit before we get to the end of our chat today. But there's something else that you kind of talked about, and I think cloud kind of plays a part in that. But there's something else you talked about in the session that really interested me, because I think when we talk about so digital transformation or business transformation, that's a phrase that we're hearing all over the place at the moment, isn't it? Everybody's looking to transform. Everybody's looking to be, I don't know, it's what the cool kids are doing. They're looking to transform, and And I thought it was really interesting that actually during the session that you gave, you talked about the part that Veeam are playing in that for organisations. So and I think for a lot of people that they may look at that and they look at Veeam as a data protection company, and maybe not just Veeam, but any data protection company. They look at them as a data protection company, and they will ask the question: how does a data protection company, how does a backup vendor play a part in my digital transformation? So I mean, do you want to touch on that a little bit? Because I thought it was a really interesting point you made during the session. The part that kind of that data and that data protection model can play in helping a business to kind of innovate and change and transform.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say unapologetically, Veeam is a backup company, but there's more. And the more is, if you look at the heart of many organizations, it is data. So first and foremost, any backup vendor, the goal is to make data available, to protect it, to ingest it, properly manage it. But when we're going through the process of properly managing and layering on different data services, everything from working with different levels of infrastructure, different cloud providers, different kind of analytics that you can run on top of that, reporting capabilities, etc. Then we want to be able to surface or expose that data for more than just recovery use cases. Not that to make light of recovery at all. If you find yourself either you've lost certain systems or if you've suffered a malicious cyber event, that recovery becomes highly critical. But aspirationally, if we have a full copy of the organization's most critical data, we believe that we can help fuel digital transformation, whatever it may mean for each organization. And DX or digital transformation often is very unique to every organization, and you might have multiple different digital transformation initiatives taking place inside of your business. But we believe that a great deal of it's going to be fueled by data. So first and foremost, making that data available, protecting it, ingesting it, properly managing it. But then at Veeam, because we can surface that data up, we can instantly mount that known good copy of production data, and we can also move that to whatever location that would be most beneficial to the business. Our goal is to try to help fuel whatever the organization's digital transformation objectives may be. We know ultimately that digital transformation is about trying to improve customer intimacy, customer experience, better outcomes as expressed in customer value, but it all starts with data. And that's what we want to make sure is able to be highly available, but then put the right data at the right place at the right time, reduce the friction to proper data management and proper data movement.
So, and that idea around data portability, thanks, a really important point because I spend a lot of my day job talking to our customers and talking to businesses I work with around modern data strategy. And for me, a key part of modern data strategy is mobility of data, data portability, portability of applications. So often again, I think that's something that will be levelled at a data protection company, maybe levelled at Veeam particularly. But how do you help me with data portability? Do you want to touch a little bit on kind of what Veeam do in that space? Because I know it's something else that you covered, and it's one of those kind of things. You've said a couple of times about unapologetically a backup company and the importance of being able to make data available in the instance when a customer needs it. And a big part of that is also a part of that kind of data portability and mobility strategy. So do you want to kind of touch, maybe for people who aren't familiar with how Veeam do that, a little bit about how that's done?
Yeah, it comes down fundamentally to the architecture of the solution is to ingest and write data in a self-describing manner such that there's not a dependence on an external catalog to be able to access that data. And this has a number of benefits. Right off the bat, what that means is if your backup recovery system should get compromised, unlike some other solutions where you'd have to go stand up that infrastructure, both hardware or software, and then you could start to read the data back, Veeam is written in a self-describing manner, so literally you could think of it like an Adobe PDF reader. And as long as you had the credentials, you could go and access that data with any other copy of Veeam or even a free utility that we've got as well. And we also have free, or meaning no charge, versions of the product that can also interoperate with that backup format. But additional value in that self-describing format is the ability to take that and move that to different locations. You could move that from on-prem to one of the major hyperscaler to another major hyperscaler. From a cloud provider, you can move that transparently across clouds. to the to on-prem capabilities or move bursts into the cloud. And there are valid reasons why bringing data back on-prem, might be valuable for you. So that's what we really want to facilitate is it's your data. You should be able to access it whenever, wherever that you would like. We don't want an architectural limitation to constrain you from how and where you can consume that. And I think going forward and tying that back into the digital transformation story, n number of years from now, 5, 7, 10 years from now, we'll probably be consuming data in ways that we can't even begin to imagine right now. We'll also probably be generating data in different ways than we are right now. So the fluidity or the portability of that data format becomes increasingly more valuable into the future, is our belief.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right. And that ability to move those kind of data sets and those workloads around and restore them in any location. So while it's still to a degree kind of a backup process, it's that availability thinking again, isn't it? That if I can protect the data over here in the public cloud, I could restore it to my on-prem data center or in another public cloud, or maybe in both, depending on what I want to do with that data. And I think it's that kind of flexibility and simplicity that's hugely important for people moving forward. And as we actually as we do start to wrap up here, I could easily have this conversation for another hour with you, because I think there's so much around this kind of this idea around how we build modern data strategy, where data protection plays a part in it, where mobility plays a part in it, how cloud integration, all of those things play massive parts in it. But I'm aware that you have a life that doesn't include just talking to me, and the people listening and watching the show also have a minimum threshold of tolerance for my voice. So we won't stay for another hour. But one thing I did want to ask you was that for somebody who's watching this or listening to this show and is in a situation where they're designing a data strategy, they're thinking about the data protection elements of it and how they integrate in all of these ever rapidly changing technology trends, is there a couple of tips that you'd be able to give them in terms of things that they should be thinking about as they kind of plan some of that future data strategy?
Yeah, and short answer is yes. And I would say this is regardless of what tools or solutions that you choose, meaning it's certainly not specific to the company that I work for. I would say part of your decision framework should be, what do you think your current requirements are? Secondarily, what's your best view into what your future requirements are? And then third, develop a strategy and implementation that's flexible enough to be able to transition into what you think the future state may be, and of course adapt to where so you might get some unforeseen curveballs. But it really comes down to, you want to design for the known. That's the engineering mindset, right? You take the known state and you try to have minimal kind of escapes or weaknesses associated with the solution that you put in place. But from a data perspective, from an availability level perspective, the tolerances are so finite, in terms of no data loss. There's ever increasing workloads. We're creating more data. I come back to this flexibility. You need to try to implement, to the best of your ability, a solution that can evolve and adapt. If you're hardwired or constrained in some way, either constrained in the deployment model, potentially even the licensing model, believe it or not, I've seen situations where finances keep people back from doing what they want to achieve. But then from a data movement perspective, I use the word friction a lot. We want to reduce the friction of moving data around. You really want an extensible, flexible solution. So whatever you choose to do, just try to reduce the lock-ins or the types of things that are going to try to essentially work against you or create friction from achieving your outcomes going forward.
And I think that's a hugely important part actually about that kind of evolution and adaptability, because it's something that we're tasked with constantly, isn't it? That we are asked as people who are involved in IT strategy or designing or architecting solutions, that the business demand is, we want to be more cloud-like, we want scale, we want agility, we want to be able to develop quickly, we want to deploy quickly. and that has to be true across your entire technology stack. There's no point making a huge investment in public cloud, for example, and then being held back by your data management, data protection tools. So I think that's hugely important, and actually something that you kind of touched on there. And I make no apologies for this in the podcast, actually, that because I've been a real big fan of this since I saw Veeam announce it, probably maybe just over a year ago. So these kind of universal licenses that Veeam use today. So this kind of move away from, and the reason I talk about this is not because I think everybody should just rush out and buy some Veeam licenses, but I think it's a really good example of commercial and technical initiative working hand in hand. Because so while Veeam gave us all of this kind of capability around portability of workloads, one of the things that was restraining that was I needed a certain set of licenses on-prem, and then I needed a different set of licenses in the public cloud to protect a workload I might have moved between A and B. And I thought that kind of shift between that and these kind of universal licenses, which then follow the workload regardless of where you have it, I think is hugely powerful. So congratulations to Veeam on that. So I just want to wrap up with something actually that maybe just kind of feeds into that. So we're recording this kind of early October, and this show is going out a week in advance of the Veeam Live event on October the 20th. And I didn't want to talk particularly about that event, but one of the things that the kind of theme for that event is cloud data best practices. So maybe as we wrap up, do you want to talk just kind of briefly around what a cloud data best practice is, and if people are listening to this ahead of Veeam Live, what they, if they want to tune into that, what they might hear?
Yeah. First of all, it really is a live event. So there no pre-recordings. It's going to be live conversations, and it really will be conversational. It's intended to offer insights and best practices, as you mentioned, ranging from the industry landscape to specifics on overcoming cyber threats, to specifics on how can you move and protect workloads into the cloud, and all points in between. And it's not only going to be Veeam people. We're going to have a number of customers, actually out in the field that do this on a day in, day out basis in production. We'll have several industry analysts. We'll have several of our partners, but it will be all with the goal of offering insights and best practices, actionable kind of advice that you can take away from the event and improve your availability, your cloud data management practice going forward.
Yeah, so it sounds like a great event, and and actually it's the first time I've seen an event where they're talking about this idea of cloud data best practices. So so I'm going to be fascinated to hear some of the things that come out of that, because I think for most enterprises, like for most of us, I suppose, we're trying to start to figure out what a lot of those best practices are right now. Because while I think it's absolutely true that we should not be throwing away all of the enterprise data center good practice that we've got just because we've moved to the cloud, there has to be an evolution of that as well. It's not quite as straightforward as everything that we did in the data center we should do in a public cloud data center. And of course there has to be that piece that deals with, I've got some on-prem, I've got some in the cloud, I've got some elsewhere, and I've got this kind of ever shifting, ever changing environment around me. So I think that's going to be some really fascinating stuff. So look, Dave, as we come to the end of our recording time here, for people who want to find out a little bit more about maybe some of the stuff you've covered before around this kind of the current state of backup and its future, or maybe they just want to come and hunt you down online, what's good ways to find out more about you, more about Veeam, and to find you on the socials?
Yeah, so Veeam.com is a great one-stop shop for learning more about Veeam from a product perspective, from a customer success perspective, downloading no charge, perpetually free versions of the products. Try it for yourself, make an informed decision. That's what I would have told people back when I was an industry analyst. Get informed, make a good decision. And then from there, you can follow me at Backup Dave on Twitter, Backup Dave on LinkedIn. Shoot me a DM. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But definitely encourage you to check out Veeam Live, check out Veeam.com, maybe download some of the products and see if it's appropriate for your environment. We've got 375,000 customers in over 180 countries. So a lot of people are choosing Veeam. It might be appropriate for you too.
Dave, look, thanks for being on the show. Really appreciate being a guest on Tech Interviews, and look forward to having you on again in the not too distant future.
Thank you so much, Paul. Always a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed that. For show notes, pop over to techstringy.com. We'll also find all of our previous Tech Interviews episodes. And if you've got an idea for a show or would like to appear as a guest, then why not drop me an email at podcast@techstringy.com. And if you want to make sure you catch the next episode of Tech Interviews, then why not subscribe? You can subscribe here on YouTube, as well as in all good homes of podcasts. So until next time, Thanks for watching.